All right, so we will get started, and people who join in, whether it's virtually or walk into the classroom, um, will not miss too much. So for today, it's about navigating your food environment. We've done lunch and learns in the past where we talk about various nutrition, topics. So first of all, if you ever come across like something that you want to know more about, don't be afraid to ask. Just let me know. Hi, Jeannie. All right. So pretty much the breakdown. So for today, we'll talk about like what your food environment is, so the definition, and then we'll break it down into categories, such as the grocery store, the home, or like your home, restaurants, work, and then just kind of summarizing, all of that in the end. Okay. All right. So food environment. So there is a definition to what food environment is. Have we ever heard of food environment? All right. So I'm just going to read exactly what the Center for Disease Control describes what food environment is. So the physical presence of food around you and how it affects your diet is also shaped by your proximity to food locations and how food stores and services are distributed around you geographically. Okay. All right. So some of the choices that we make, especially from like a home perspective, happen within like a 5 mile radius. And so then when you think of like, well, what percentage of that, you know, like are those choices kind of happening from? And so it's like you think of like 80% of your food choices are kind of happening, whether it's like the choices you make where you live or the choices you make around like where you work, like if you were to go out to lunch or to breakfast, right? All right. So I'll move on. So like I said, grocery store, home, restaurant, work. So pretty much some thought starters, some questions to think about. So for the grocery store, like if you were to go to the grocery store, what two top items would you typically shop for? What? Oh, what? Eggs. Eggs. Oh yeah, eggs. Frozen pizza. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Salad. Anyone else? All right. So then from like a home perspective, so let's think about how many meals do we eat at home? So how many of you eat breakfast at home every day, just by a raise of hands? Okay. How many of you eat dinner at home? Raise of hands. Okay. So more dinner than breakfast. Okay. So then from a restaurant perspective, what are like the top two or three places that you tend to eat at, whether it's home or around work? Are they the same places? I won't make anyone answer that because it's almost like a call out. Oh. Culver's. Yeah.
My husband orders from the same Chinese restaurant every single time he gets takeout food.
Okay.
They know him, they recognize his voice, and when he comes in, they don't even really look, they just hand him his meal.
That is that is sad, but we'll talk to your husband.
It is.
And so then the last one is like when you're at work, like are you eating your breakfast, at work? And do you have things that are accessible, from like a breakfast standpoint or from like a work or from a lunch standpoint? For us here, we have the cafe. So that does make it, more accessible. But if you were in a workplace where you just didn't have that sort of thing, then you kind of have to provide or like what's in your break room or maybe what's at your desk. So that's always a thought starter as well. All right. So let's start with the very first aspect, and that is the grocery store. All right. So, we've talked about things, such as like the picking your produce like first, which is the yellow circle, and then like the not shopping when hungry circle, and then the reading the nutrition labels. So we'll focus a little more on the compartmentalize your cart aspect, just because I think that's something we don't talk about too much. So when we go grocery shopping, the very first one where they talk about keeping fruits and veggies, like closest to you in your cart. So they say like in the very last example is like use a purse or a zipper or like a newspaper or like a reusable grocery bag and kind of like make divides in your cart and try to fill up, again, more fruits and vegetables more than anything. So how many of you remember our previous conversation about like shopping the outer perimeter first before like going into the center? So, yep, Dylan. Dylan remembers. So the outer perimeter is where you find your produce, you find your meats, you find your dairy, and then all the stuff in the center is more like processed. Not all of it's processed, but a good chunk of it can be for sure. Um, so any other tips, like have you guys experienced or things that you do in the sense of like the grocery shopping aspect? Nancy?
Just learned of the new app called Yuka, YUKA. And you just scan each item and it gives the product of reading and its helpfulness or the fat or the sugar content and just lays it all out there right there.
Yeah.
It is free.
Yeah, I have heard of that app as well. So for the people who are on virtually, there is that app called Yuka, where it pretty much will tell you the breakdown, nutritionally, and sometimes they actually tell you like, instead of this, like pick this, instead as like a better choice. I've heard of that app. I was just trying to figure out how to like highlight it in something, to tell people about it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Real quick question.
Yeah.
Are you gonna email these slides to us?
Yes, there will be a slide deck, and then at the very end, there will be like a kind of like a summary slide just to highlight some of the things that were more important than anything. So in the sense of when we're shopping the fruits and veggies, how much time do you think someone spends in the fruit and veggie aisle in minutes? Higher? Just a little higher?
It's 10, depending on how much and how selective you want to be on exactly which tomatoes you. Avocados you get.
Yeah, yeah,
How many you have to handle before you pick one?
yeah. So essentially, the average time tends to be about 5 minutes when shopping through the produce. Um, zigzagging through it, is kind of always a good way to increase that time just to make sure that you are getting more of the fruits and veggies that you need. I going to say this as a helpful tip, just to kind of put myself in the I'm single box, but I shop like the frozen like vegetable and fruit section only just because as someone who doesn't use them as quickly, I don't want to waste that money. And it also ends up being more of a convenience thing for me too. But that's just more like my personal, side note to this whole thing. All right. All right. Welcome to the person that just walked in. All right. So for the gray circle, talking about the not shopping when hungry, which many of us have done. I know I've gone to the grocery store, but one of the suggestions is, like eat a meal or like a snack, before you go. Or like another choice would be to chew a piece of gum while you're kind of walking through, almost like it takes care of that whole kind of oral fixation and like what you're thinking while you're shopping. And so if you're chewing and you're not necessarily thinking about, oh, yo, that sounds good, I should get that.
That would require grocery shopping before you run out of food in the house.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So then when you think of like those sorts of tips, those are always good choices as well. So in the sense of when we're shopping the aisles, there's kind of like this danger zone, where we think of like the four C's. And C's are food stuff. So what sort of food stuff do you think of with like the four C's?
Carbs.
So narrow it down to like the types of food. Candy is one. What comes in a bag, and their slogan is, I bet you can't eat just one. Yep,
Chips,
yep. What about the crackers is another, cookies is another, and then
cookies,
the last one, think of all the boxes, and they always try to get your children. Cereal, you got it, you got it. So just be careful of those four C's, or maybe it's five C's with cookies, which does not really translate to candy. So that's always something to be aware of, when you're shopping through that center aisle. All right. So then for the nutrition label aspect, when we talk about the 3 grams of fiber in, let's say like your cereal shopping, looking for like a cereal that's got 3 grams of fiber. Or, if I move to the next slide and we talk about the food label in itself, it's like the one on the very far right, well, of me, if I look at it like you're looking at it, is the newer one. The one closer to me is the old one. So the new one's got the added sugars. So if any of us remember from the previous conversation about 4 grams of sugar is technically 1 teaspoon of sugar. So if you're trying to keep your sugar intake low, just again, look at the added sugars. And so on that, what's new and different, when they talk about like the indication of like added sugars, if you're looking at the label and it says like refined sugar or like corn syrup or high fructose, like knowing what the different types of sugars are is going to be beneficial as well. Another kind of thing on this label, like the very bottom half, like right here, is more of the highlight of like vitamins and minerals that we tend to be deficient in. Versus like the older label, which, just talked about like vitamin A and vitamin C, calcium and iron. I think a lot of us get our vitamin C, I think, for the most part. The other ones tend to be iffy. But then also kind of being a little more realistic in that the serving size. So again, on that far right, it's a lot more bold versus like it just being like the same font and not bold on the nutrition label closest to me. So those are like some of the changes, and we've talked a little bit about this before. Have you guys do you read nutrition labels when you shop? Yeah, nice, cool. All right, how are we doing so far? Any questions so far? Okay. All right.
the FDA has actually approved doing nutrition labeling on the front of the box with some key information that they feel is important for consumers. So there will be changes to nutrition labels coming. Sorry, I underwrite food.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. It's always good to know. It's always a learning process. So,
I was on vacation last week in Mexico. Mexico on can't operate anything with excessive sugar or calories has a big red box.
oh, okay.
Has excessive calories. On a carton of cigarettes, I was walking through the airport, through the military, whatever. It literally says, these will kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting for sure. All right, so let's move into the home slide. So with the home slide, I'll try to speak a little quicker just to stay on track. So this remake your kitchen and then upgrade your tablescape are the two topics that we'll be talking about. So this particular slide is more in reference to like if let's say you walked into like my home and I had like breakfast cereal sitting on the counter, or I had like a bag of crackers or chips or cookies or anything that wasn't super great for you, but maybe I didn't really have a lot of fruit sitting on my counter either. Um, the numbers that are next to it are pretty much like those types of foods that would kind of increase the weight. Do you remember that whole like out of sight, out of mind, conversation? Where like if you see it, you're more likely to eat it, so by keeping it off of the counter, you're less likely to eat it. And I feel like that is true. I feel like if things are hiding in a cupboard, you don't notice it unless you're always bored and you're looking through your cupboard. That's always dangerous.
Fascinating with diet soda gives you almost as much weight gain as regular.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. That's why, well, I don't know who keeps diet soda on their counter, but
No, between-
I was gonna say in the refrigerator. Yeah, in the refrigerator for sure.
Apple up first, it will be
Yes.
versus a whole apple, no one wants to take that bite and leave the rest, but if I slice it up and serve it in a bowl, it gets incredible.
I find it interesting where it's like, a parent gives a child an apple, like a whole apple, and then there's just like a couple of nibbles taken out of it. And then it's like, oh, well, probably could have just chopped it up and, made it easier. All right.
I started using that, fruit clean, where you spray it on your vegetables, and I started washing that, so that helps keep it real nice. And it supposedly keeps it fresh for longer, but from turning brown, no, I cut it up with the meat over, it is.
Oh, so it's not an issue.
Yeah.
I have heard that like if like let's say you cut around the core and then you piece it back around the core and then that because that cut side isn't like exposed. So yeah. All right, so with this next slide is more of a kitchen makeover. So it's like when we think of, the physical changes within our kitchen, the things that we see, so here, quick and easy, like moving certain foods like off the counter and more into a cupboard, or like renovations such as like, well, the refrigerator part would be a big ask, but like, maybe changing the lighting. So with an example about the lighting, like we're more tempted to eat more when the lighting is dim. So it's almost like it gives like this cozy vibe. So then you're like, oh, what am I craving? Is it something comforting that I'm, striving for? So just as like a thought. So making your kitchen less loungeable, it's like I know that some people have the islands that extend, like far, and so then they've got, bar stools, and then, maybe there's stuff sitting on the island, that people might be able to reach for. So that's always something to consider. So making it less loungeable. Okay. Um, there's also been more like, does your kitchen like the colors, in the kitchen, whether it's the wall or like the backsplash or something. It's like pretty much with like restaurants when they pick paint or like colors, it's always like red and yellow and green, versus like muted colors. So there was also that kind of like change and making it more neutral and not so inviting, so to speak. So then in the sense of like the cooking easier part, number three, you know, like prepping your vegetables, and making it to where like if they're in clear containers and they're in your refrigerator and they're in the very front, which I know could be kind of a challenge because sometimes if I put something in the refrigerator, something gets pushed back, instead of like, again, rearranging. So always keeping that in mind when you're thinking about your kitchen space and making sure that you've got, access to fresh fruits and vegetables as well. Okay. I will double check, see what notes I got here. So otherwise, there was one other one. I really feel like this is less home than it is more of a work thing, but it's more of like a candy dish sort of situation that sometimes people keep a candy dish like sitting on their counter. This would be a work thing too. But you're more apt to like grab, the candy. And so you're ingesting about 74 to 125 extra calories per day. Like if you're grabbing for candy, whether you're at your desk or at home. So then technically that ends up being like 5 to 6 additional pounds per year because of the candy dish situation. Okay. One interesting aspect about this whole kitchen makeover piece is that there is a book called Slim Design. And it is by, I have it on my notes somewhere. I did not highlight it, but pretty much the guy was talking about like, like plate size and, the candy dish, the example that I gave about the calories. But I'll talk about the plate size when we get to the next slide. All right. So making small changes at mealtime. So this is where the plate size thing comes in. I chose this picture as kind of a funny ha because it seems to be like this like social media trend where either you're making like you turn the whole table into like this kind of nacho, you know, thing, or maybe it's like a big box of tacos. But if you're kind of sitting at like this, meal that becomes like family style, that you're more apt to like just eat more. And so like that's where like the second bullet on here about the family style is like a question mark. You just want to be careful about how you serve things family style. So let's say if it's like a casserole or anything, that's not like salads or a veggie, like you could keep the salads and the veggie, on the table, but maybe move like the carbohydrates and like the dressing and the main dishes like off the table. So again, these are more suggestive than they are like anything. Just ideas as like a takeaway. And then just like placing extras and leftovers, like bagging them up or putting them away and off the table, out of sight, out of mind, just to kind of keep people from overeating. Always a suggestion. And then using the smaller serving plates and cups. So I brought these examples from the cafe just because, it was easier than me bringing stuff from home. But, it's like we've got two different size plates. Obviously, this one's a lot smaller and, more saucer-like. But, like back in like 1990, a typical plate was probably more about like 9 3/4 versus like something that's like 11 to 12 inches, like, you know, across versus like something that's smaller. So there's less calories that end up on this plate and you could still fill it up. But if you fill this up, it ends up being maybe 2 times, maybe 2.5 times more calories than what you were thinking. So food for thought there. And then I also brought, again, the cafe, an 8-ounce cup versus like a 16-ounce cup. again, what you fill it up with, it's up to you. But if you're using the soup bar, more calories, in here, maybe take out the broth, since you're having to pay for it, and get a little more nutritional value and it fills you up versus just drinking the liquid. All right, so I'll move past that. All right, so we'll move a little quicker. All right, so restaurant checklist. Choose your seat wisely, weigh your options, and read menu descriptions. So when you think of like buffets, scout the buffet before you eat. You know, like if you're gonna grab your plate, walk around really quick just to see what you want to eat, make your decision from there. Sit further away, like instead of like right next to the buffet, if you face away versus like facing at the buffet, and then you feel less tempted that way. Again, we talked about plate size. And then from like a eating perspective, when you think of like less calories, that you're ingesting, obviously we're not all fantastic at using chopsticks, but you use your non-dominant hand or, chew more often instead of like being in a hurry and chewing less and then just swallowing. So then when it comes to like the dishes, that very far right side, of like where you're sitting, like where you should sit. If you were to sit at the bar where there's like a TV, people are more apt to like order drinks, order things like ribs and wings and, appetizers and desserts, those things, like you wouldn't choose those things as often. One would make the assumption if you were sitting at a table, but sitting like near the window, a well-lit area, again, when we were talking about the lighting piece, and then sitting at an elevated table versus like, I don't know, it's almost like when you think of sitting at a booth and it's more cushy, right? Order, if your order comes out, put half of the side or put half of that meal in a to-go box. And then if you're gonna do the chips and the bread, like if you go to a restaurant, like a Mexican restaurant, just have them bring that stuff out when the meal comes instead of overeating on chips and salsa, which is my kryptonite. All right, so there's this whole aspect about like it's called menu engineering. Essentially, when people talk about getting crafty with like descriptive words and like this whole sensory experience with like our eyes and our mouth and our nose, the types of words that they choose, like buttery, creamed, crispy, crunchy, fried, like those sorts of words, yes, they probably sound great, but think of like seasoned or roasted or marinated would probably be a little more healthy and less calories than like those in the box. Okay. All right. So work out of sight, out of mind, plan ahead for lunchtime. Again, the candy dish, we talked about this. If you kept it farther away from your desk versus like at your desk, that would be another way of keeping the calories down. If you keep the candy dish covered and it's more opaque, that's always another way too. All right. And so then the last and final one is just like the watching your portions. We've talked about this before. I have this fun little plate that I've shown some people where it's like you think of like, the green is like veggies and fruits, and that's half the plate. A quarter of the plate for the orange is grains, and then the other quarter is more like proteins. And then that small little dot in the middle is more like your fats. But when you think of like using your hand, you can use it for like portion sizes as well. Whether it's like a cupped version would be like your carb, or like the palm version would be your protein, or like a fist size could be like your fruit. And then your thumb is like your fat. Okay. All right. So I was trying to see what else I have on here. Does anyone have any questions? No. Going back to like the whole kind of plate and bowl situation, that the bigger the bowl, you know, there's more calories. So it's like, you think like there's 42% more calories that you're consuming from a larger bowl versus like something that's smaller. And then you're just consuming 19% less calories depending on your plate size. Obviously, this is a huge difference from small to big, but you know, I know that they offer those to-go containers in the cafe. Right? So that is the navigate your food environment.